tell me what you make of Mitch McConnell's comments on the Supreme Court. I mean, he's uniquely qualified to comment on it since he did jack that seat, the open seat, during Barack Obama's presidency.
Mitch McConnell did the country a great disservice. He remains a formidable power. It is important to note that when it comes to ethics, the Supreme Court decides its own ethics, that no action by the Senate or the House will have any influence on what the Supreme Court can or cannot do. And this is just more of Mitch McConnell ruminating about the Supreme Court.
Well, he said specifically, it seems to me, this is a quote, it seems to me there are nonstop attacks on the Supreme Court week after week after week. So I'm not going to dignify that with a response. We need to leave the Supreme Court alone, protect them from people who went into their neighborhoods and tried to do them harm. Look out for the Supreme Court. That's part of the job of the administration.
Look, I just want to be clear. Samuel Alito is not a fair and impartial determiner when it comes to Donald Trump. And it's very clear now that hoisting a flag, as was done at a Supreme Court justice's house, even though he wants to blame it on his wife. Oh, wait a minute. I blame everything on my wife, but okay. It is absolutely ridiculous. And by the way, they talk about judges recusing themselves and so forth and so on, and bias and prejudice in the lower courts, which is what Donald Trump keeps talking about. My question is, if you know these people have a prejudice, shouldn't they recuse themselves? But I think for Mitch McConnell, it is the ultimate in hypocrisy. But I expect nothing less from the former Senate Majority Leader, who I would hasten to point out is retiring as leader, and so he won't be a factor after January.
It seems to me that there are nonstop attacks in the Supreme Court week after week after week. I'm thinking, I just love that. It's the same thing that Donald Trump says. I can't believe all these court cases against me. Hey, dude, when you break the law and you do lawless things and you do unethical things, you're going to make the news cycle. You might even end up being indicted in the case of Donald Trump. In the case of the Supreme Court, I think it's fair for there to be criticism.
If there were fairness, neither Clarence Thomas nor Samuel Alito would be allowed to participate in any court deliberations dealing with 2020. And they have certainly expressed their biases. And when we have the decision, which will come, I believe, within a few weeks from the Supreme Court as their term ends, on the question of presidential immunity, I expect Alito and Thomas to side with Donald Trump. I hope I'm wrong, but it would show their implicit bias and prejudice.
Indeed, indeed. More classified documents found at Mar-a-Lago after the Mar-a-Lago raid. The findings were cited in an 87-page opinion by U.S. District Judge Beryl Howell last year. This is more than we were aware of initially. She cited the finding of additional classified documents in the bedroom area of Mar-a-Lago. It's just more classified. Here's a quote: more classified documents, more classified marked documents were uncovered in November in 2022 in a leased storage unit, in December of 2022 in the office at Mar-a-Lago, and apparently sometime thereafter in the former president's own bedroom at Mar-a-Lago. Notably, no excuses provided as to how the former president could miss the classified marked documents found in his own bedroom at Mar-a-Lago.
But whatever the reason, you understand, they didn't prosecute Mike Pence because they knew that there was no intention, and Mike Pence was completely open. They didn't prosecute Joe Biden for the same reason. But what you have from Donald Trump is a constant obstruction. And I think if they get him on this, it's a good thing, although you understand that's been put off as well until after the election of 2024.
Yeah, well, I mean,
the tragedy here is accountability, and he should be held accountable. And hopefully one day he will be. Although I caution people that if he is elected president of the United States, he will pardon himself. There will be no prosecution.
Well, and it seems to me like that is going to be a long list of cautions that you might provide should he become president again.
Well, you asked a question at the beginning. I do listen very attentively to the Mark Thompson program, I want you to know. And that has to do with the question of what you call a former what you call a former office holder. You call them, as Kim McAllister correctly pointed out, by the title, the highest title they previously had. So, for instance, when I dealt with Harold Stassen, who'd left the governorship of Minnesota in 1943, well into his 90s, we were still calling him Governor Stassen. It's a sign of respect. So when you deal with a former president, I listened recently to Edward R. Murrow's interviews with Harry Truman. Truman was out of office. Eisenhower was president. But Mr. Murrow called the former president Mr. President as a sign of respect, just as I called you a former radio talk show host on KGO. That's a sign of respect.
Well, you don't need to call me anything. I just feel the respect from you, which is so delightful.
I want everybody to mark that.
Yes, it's very true. Randy, I thought, had sort of a similar thing that he said on this drill down. Yeah, I just want to make sure all of our listeners are in, have the, B.A. Ware says it. So this is right. It is when addressing a former president of the United States in a formal setting, it's Mr. whomever. Again, if it's a guy.
Yeah, it's President. Mr. President.
Yeah.
When Richard Nixon appeared with David Frost in the notorious interviews, David Frost referred to him as Mr. President.
Right.
When Walter Cronkite interviewed Dwight D. Eisenhower, it was Mr. President. When the last interview with Lyndon Johnson, again a Cronkite exclusive, it was Mr. President. And may I point out that if Newt Gingrich, for instance, appears on a television program, he is always called Mr. Speaker.
Right. You support that?
Yes, of course.
You do?
There's no problem with it. If you want to qualify it, you can say, sir, you served as the 43rd president of the United States. Mr. President, let's proceed from there. But yes, I think it is entirely appropriate.
Despite the gag order, Donald Trump is assailing one of his prosecutors again. Appeared to criticize Matthew Colangelo, though he did not mention his name. But in leaving the court, Trump appeared to again violate the gag order. He
did, and he ought to be slammed for it. I don't necessarily think he should go to jail, but certainly there should be another fine. When the court is now considering a variety of things, but it will really be on recess next week. When we gather next Wednesday, the jury will begin deliberations. My understanding is that the final instructions are issued on Tuesday. So it's going to be a very interesting week ahead.
The thought is from David K. Johnson, and I believe also from David Katz, who joins us, the former federal prosecutor, joins us tomorrow, that penalties associated with some of these gag order violations may be imposed at the end of the trial, that it's sentencing, et cetera. So that shoe still has to drop. I'll finish up with and then I'll get to the Middle East here in a second. But Rudy Giuliani was, as you know, served at his 80th birthday party, and they did get him to, of course, to answer these charges. And in so doing, he pleads not guilty and begins this speech calling the case completely political. It was a court proceeding that was over the phone, so that he didn't actually have to be in the courtroom. And the presiding judge actually interrupted him and said, I don't want to mute you, sir. But I mean, Giuliani went on like he was on Fox News or something. It was like a soliloquy that he was doing. John, can you comment on
a bulldoze operation? That's what Giuliani does, and that's what Trump does. They figure if they keep talking, they can control the situation. Sort of like being a guest on the Mark Thompson program. If I just keep talking, but you understand that is their methodology. And who did Donald Trump learn that from? And who did Rudy Giuliani learn that from? But Roy Cohn. That was Roy Cohn's technique. Roy Cohn, of course, Joe McCarthy's chief hatchet man and attorney.
Well, there is something I want to ask you about, and just give me 45 seconds on it, because I think the epic fall that Rudy Giuliani, by the way, I've never been a huge Rudy Giuliani guy. Okay, I mean, I can document it for you. He's been dining out on being America's mayor after 9/11. You know, he's been dining out on that for forever. But He started the election deniability back when he was running for mayor. He started that crap. But anyway, I do have to acknowledge the epic fall, though, that this guy has taken from a person who did have respect to he's now laughably corrupt and awful, reviled by most everyone, even those within the GOP. Can you speak for just a second as to your impression of what's happened to Rudy Giuliani?
It's an epic tragedy. This man, who was viewed as America's mayor, Time Magazine Man of the Year, acclaimed everywhere, considered seriously for the presidential nomination of the Republican Party, a man who came through. And you may remember there was a term limit on the New York mayor in those days, and people wanted to lift the term limit so he could run again. I remember people who I knew who were involved in that. It's tragic. Here is a man who accomplished a great deal, who will be recorded in history for his magnificent moments, and who has failed utterly. And that is the ultimate tragedy of Rudy Giuliani.
Indeed, indeed. We had a question, and I believe this is from Brian. Brian says, we love Rothmann on the show. Can we ask John Rothmann about these various countries, like Ireland, pushing for a Palestinian country? Yeah, speak to that. Thank you, Brian, for the super chat.
Let me just, so we're up to date on this.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I shout out to Brian as well. Spain, Ireland, and Norway have decided to join other nations who recognize a Palestinian state. I want to reach back in history. When 1947-48, the Palestinians declared an independent state, and Robert Lovett, who was then the Assistant Secretary of State, declined recognition because it wasn't an identified territory. And I think that is really the key. There is no identified territory. The United States is in favor of a Palestinian state as part of a two-state solution. And let me just quickly comment on this. As someone who has advocated a two-state solution for many years, it takes two to tango. And what you have is basically Hamas calling for a one-state solution, the destruction of Israel. And you have the Palestinian Authority theoretically in favor of a two-state solution, but equivocating constantly. That's why they celebrate Al-Nakba, the day of destruction. All I can say is, in order to have a two-state solution, you have to have everyone committed to that idea. When the Israelis offered a two-state solution, Yasser Arafat said no. And if you don't believe me, just read Bill Clinton's memoirs. Bill Clinton details what happened at Camp David. It is the ultimate tragedy for both peoples. And I would remind you that the United States voted for a two-state solution in 1947, and that, again, the Palestinians said no. Now, if a Palestinian state means what happened with Hamas, there will never be a Palestinian state. The Israelis will never permit it. But let me be clear. It was Israel that withdrew unilaterally from Gaza, which withdrew settlements, which withdrew settlers, which offered massive economic aid. And what happened? Hamas took over, and Gaza has been used as a staging ground to attack Israel. If you want a two-state solution, if I want a two-state solution, then we have to have a clear, definitive statement. Let me just end this. I mean, it's really important to me. I was with some people the other day who advocate for a two-state solution. And I said, fine, where do you want the Palestinian state to be governed? Do you want Hamas to govern the Palestinian state? Oh, no, 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 no. I said, what about the radical Fatah faction of the Palestinian Authority? No, 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 no. I said, well, who's going to govern the Palestinian state? What's the big question now, Mark? Who's going to govern Gaza? The Israelis.
Well, let me follow up on that. I've got a couple of things to follow up on, but let's start there. What if I say to you, hey, what we'll do is we will not recognize Fatah, we will not recognize the
Hamas?
Hamas or the Houthis is what I was thinking about. We won't recognize any terrorist organization in the Middle East. We will recognize the Palestinian Authority that we will help support, which is kind of what had happened before essentially Hamas took over. And by the way, Hamas took over with the help of, as you know, Israeli funding. There was considerable evidence that Netanyahu was very much behind. John,
when
there
Hamas,
was money going in.
You're confusing two facts. Originally, Hamas received some support from Israel when they were competing with Fatah for control.
Weren't they also competing with the Palestinian Authority?
Yes.
The PA was in Gaza.
Yeah, what happened was Hamas won an election in Gaza.
No, I understand that, but I'm saying that they did receive money during that time.
What did they do with the Palestinian Authority people? They threw them off rooftops.
No, absolutely right. There's no question about that. In fact, I think one of the underreported stories is the regime under Hamas that the people of Gaza have had to live under. You talk about not tolerating any dissent, Hamas is a brutal governance organization. Leave aside their terrorism.
If the Palestinians would declare unilaterally the opposition to terror, return the hostages, agree to live side by side in peace, there would be a two-state solution. But there will be no two-state solution as long as the Israelis feel legitimately that Hamas became a staging ground and a Palestinian state on the West Bank controlled by Hamas, which most certainly would happen, would be a staging ground. So the Palestinian people themselves have to determine their future, and they can't do it through Hamas, and they can't do it through the Palestinian Authority. It's a serious problem. I don't have an answer. I don't. I can tell you
I think that what you've just said is so very true. You need an organization, a governing body with agency to actually have a negotiation and to have a fresh start. And all we have is these terrorist organizations, true terrorist organizations, militarized terrorist organizations. It's not your granddad's terrorism organization anymore. It's not a bunch of guys who just strap explosives to various kids or women or themselves and blow up a bus. These are militarized organizations.
Did you see the pictures this morning that were released of the attack on October 7th? You have to see them to understand the horror. So even my friends on the left in Israel who favored the creation of a Palestinian Arab state will say, not under these conditions, not under these circumstances. So when the Europeans, and I'm speaking now particularly of Norway, Spain, and Ireland, recognize a Palestinian state, what does that mean? All of them said they're not doing it calling for the destruction of Israel. That's a good thing. But understand that unless the impulse to destroy Israel is thoroughly removed, the Israelis aren't going to budge. Not after October 7th, and frankly, not before. May I also point out, if Benjamin Netanyahu vanished from the scene, if he were not prime minister of Israel, that would be the position of any subsequent Israeli government as well.
There is considerable dissent in the Netanyahu government. And,
and rightly so.
He's a troubled leader right now.
He is a leader who has not delivered. And when the demand is made for him to get the hostages out, that's not within his power. It's Hamas who has the power. But there is a feeling that Benjamin Netanyahu has failed on that level. By the way, very similar to the feeling about Golda Meir, the iconic Israeli leader, or Moshe Dayan, after the 1973 Yom Kippur or October War. There was the same feeling of frustration. And the tragedy here, and I say this regretfully, Mark, is I don't think a change in leadership will move the Palestinian Authority or Hamas one way or the other. Do you know how long it took for the Palestinian Authority to condemn what Hamas did? And then they did it very tepidly. Well, if I had been Mahmoud Abbas, I would have flown to Jerusalem, put my arms around the prime minister of Israel and said, we stand with you 100%. We oppose terror. He didn't do that. And I think that is one of the real tragedies. And so how do we get to a two-state solution? I think the ball is in the Palestinian court. Clearly, the United States will help. Clearly, the Europeans will help. But Hamas and the Palestinian Authority remain the obstacle.
You'd like to see just unilateral disarmament. You know, to say we're disarming, we are returning what hostages have survived, and we're ready to sit down at the table. If Hamas
that's what
said
Hamas must do, and that's what the Palestinian Authority should be demanding, and they're not. By the way, the Palestinian Authority is thoroughly corrupt, and we know that. We admit that. Mahmoud Abbas is 87 years old. He's not a capable leader anymore, and the people who are coming up behind him, frankly, call for the destruction of Israel. So what do the Israelis do? There was former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Olmert, suggested that Israel unilaterally declare a Palestinian state. And I understand that sentiment. That's what they did in Gaza. They unilaterally withdrew from Gaza, and look what they got. So the proof will be in the pudding, so to speak. Whether or not a two-state solution happens is dependent upon the Palestinians themselves.
And two things I just want to quickly note and underscore. What you just talked about with Olmert and the reality in Israel is an important thing for people to understand. There's a fractious kind of conversation going on. There are passionate, emotional conversations about what should happen there, and there always have been, about integrating the Palestinians into the state of Israel or letting them have some kind of state that the Israelis are perfectly cool with. That's been going on for decades, those conversations, and now they're still going on in the way that John has just noted. But the other thing that John said I think does bear underscoring as well is the intense corruption that you find within many of these organizations. The Palestinian Authority, and you just heard me speak about the Palestinian Authority, and I felt as though they were undermined, and I wish they hadn't been undermined. In Gaza, I'm talking about. But in any case, they are corrupt. John is right about that. And John is right about the corruption of Hamas. Hamas, the leadership lives, you know, like kings they live. They don't even live in Gaza. And they have been taking all of that funding, and it has been used in corrupt ways. Same is true in leadership roles for many of these terrorist organizations. So, John, in that sea of corruption, it's depressing to me, because I don't know how you see a leader or leadership rise up and actually get us to a better place.
You think it's depressing for you? Talk to the people of Israel. Because what it means, if all fails, it means a perpetual conflict and perpetual acts of terror. And no prime minister, whether a prime minister is right or left or center, no prime minister can allow peace in the proper way without a Palestinian counterpart. You have to have a partner. And again, I urge people, go back and read Bill Clinton's analysis of what happened at Camp David. It was a very clear statement. Do you remember when it ended? What did Bill Clinton do? He blamed Yasser Arafat publicly.
Now, speaking of corruption, Arafat was insanely corrupt. I mean, I think he lived in Paris a lot of the time, and he took all of that money. He was a mobster, Arafat. And a lot of these guys in these terrorist organizations are mobsters. And that mobster didn't want to see his mob broken up. He had no interest in peace, I don't think, Arafat.
I don't either. And remember, the money is still controlled by his wife and daughter. It was never turned over to the Palestinian Authority.
John, you're such a great resource on this stuff, and I'm hopeful, but it's a definite grim situation.
I'm a realist, not an optimist, not a pessimist. I'm a realist. Can I ask you, are you sold out for the event?
We are. We're totally sold out for the event. You will be with us on June 3rd. It's June Swoon with John Rothmann, one of the luminaries who will pass through our life. We also have Josh Mankiewicz from Dateline NBC. You knew his dad, Frank Mankiewicz. And Spencer Christian's going to be through. We have a lot of people that I still have to contact who'll be through, visiting and floating through what will be a really great event. And if it's a good one, maybe we'll do one the following month or in a couple of months. So definitely.
And I urge everybody, because there wasn't enough room, contribute to the Mark Thompson program. It is very important when it's listener maintained, listener sustained, that we support something that really is so vital. And so, Mark, I want to add my endorsement 100%. The work that
John, you always are very good about mentioning that. I appreciate it. We don't ask you to do it, and you do it, and you do it that Rothmann way. I want to mention something very important. I'd like you all to know that the Mark Thompson Show needs your support. The way you say everything is terrific. Now, John can be found on The Voice of San Francisco, and also his His podcast is Around the Political World with John Rothmann. We have it up there on the screen to remind everybody. It's a daily podcast, and it's 10 minutes in length, I think. Isn't that right?
That is correct. And Around the Political World is there. And now we're doing the Voice of San Francisco, which is 10 minutes on local politics in the city, particularly the race for mayor, but other issues as well.
You haven't endorsed anyone for mayor yet, have you?
I have not formally endorsed, but I will.
There's a whiff.
Yes.
There's a whiff.
No, let me explain.
A whiff of something.
The Voice of San Francisco is officially neutral. They make no endorsements, and I want to make that clear. I, on the other hand, as an individual, am supporting Mark Farrell, who appeared on your program.
Yes, he did, and that is my pick because now, as you know, I could be bought off my pick, and I also so I'm right up front about that. I mean, the right super sticker or super chat or Patreon or PayPal contribution, it's possible I would reconsider the Mark Farrell endorsement. But I am right now comfortable endorsing Mark Farrell for mayor of San Francisco.
For the appropriate remuneration, I know.
Yes,
but,
thank you.
No, I'm glad. Let me just say on the Voice of San Francisco, we plan to interview all the candidates. They are neutral because of the nature of what we do with commentary. I'm extremely cautious about that. But my individual support goes for Mark, who was my member of the Board of Supervisors. When I was president of the Neighborhood Association, he was always responsible, always able, and I frankly like him very much. Let me just point out, we have ranked choice voting. I'm doing an explanation of ranked choice voting on the Voice of San Francisco in a few days, but I want to be clear. It means that there will be no runoff. So in San Francisco, if you come in last, your vote can go for somebody else if you so indicate, and all the way up the line. So to pick a winner is virtually impossible. And I will only point out one other thing, and that is in Oakland, where they have ranked choice voting, they are trying to get away. They're trying to eliminate it.
I was just about to ask you, do you support ranked choice voting or not?
No, 100% opposed. I believe it's completely undemocratic.
And how did it end up being the policy in San Francisco?
To save money, because when you hold a runoff, it costs you millions of dollars.
I always say if something doesn't make sense, it's about money.
And let me tell you, sometimes it makes sense to contribute to the Mark Thompson program.
Oh, come on. One more time he gets it in. Thanks, John Rothmann. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.